December night, 1944. A field camp on the outskirts of eastern France, wrapped in fog and gunpowder smell. Floodlights slice through the darkness, catching faces tired, hollow-eyed German women lined up in formation. The war's chaos had spat them here nurses, clerks, communication aides now labeled enemy prisoners. Their breath turns white in the freezing air. Then an American lieutenant steps forward, reading from a crumpled paper. His voice cuts like ice. They'll sleep in coffins tonight. The words don't make sense at first. A ripple moves through the line, confused glances, then murmurs, then panic. The women look past the lieutenant to the stack of rough wooden boxes piled near the fence. Boxes shaped like graves. Someone whispers in German, "Sind das Sage? Are those coffins? The guards bark orders." Form lines of 10. The prisoners hesitate, unsure if this is punishment or execution. A young nurse clutches her coat tighter, heart pounding so hard she can hear it in her ears. The ground is iron hard, the sky silent except for the wind dragging at the canvas tents. Reports later recorded that over 3,500 German female POW were processed through this sector after the Ardennes push. Many had marched for miles through snow. The temperature that night was below -10 degrees Celsius. But statistics don't describe the sound, the scrape of boots, the tremor in a voice when someone thinks this might be their last breath. An American sergeant mutters under his breath, "Orders are orders," as he points to the boxes. The women move hesitantly toward them. One stumbles, another starts praying. A few begin crying silently, not wanting to show weakness before the guards. To the Americans, it's logistics. To the Germans, it feels like death. "We thought they wanted to bury us alive," one later recalled. The scene is a blur of torchlight, fear, and misunderstanding. The lieutenant folds his paper back into his coat, expression unreadable. He doesn't know the phrase on that paper came from a mistranslated supply memo. The women are ordered to lie down inside the boxes. Lids creak. The sound of hammering fades into the cold night, and as the final lid shuts, silence falls so thick it feels like burial. But what happens inside those boxes, what they feel, what they hear, will twist the story forever. The lid shuts with a dull wooden thud, sealing out the world. Total blackness, the kind that makes your heartbeat sound like footsteps coming closer. Inside the crate, the air is thick and sharp, smelling of pine, sweat, and fear. The German women try not to breathe too fast, counting seconds in the dark. Somewhere nearby, another crate creaks as someone shifts, and the sound echoes like a coffin door groaning underground. One nurse, barely 22, presses her palms to the lid. The wood is wet with condensation. Cold seeps through her fingertips like needles. She whispers to herself, "Ich lieb, I'm alive, I'm alive." Her breath fogs up in front of her face, invisible in the dark. Frost begins to form along the seams of the box. The air feels thinner by the minute. Each coffin is roughly 6.5 feet long, 2 feet wide, barely enough space to turn. That's less than 20 cubic feet of air per person. In these conditions, frostbite can begin within 15 minutes, and loss of consciousness within 30 if ventilation fails. But none of them know the numbers. They only know the sound of splinters cracking as someone claws the wood, begging to be let out. A woman sobs softly. Another mutters a prayer. A third laughs hysterically, the sound breaking into gasps. Fear becomes physical, suffocating, wet alive. It wasn't death we feared. One POW would later write it was the waiting. Outside, the guards stand silent, pretending not to hear the muffled crying. Their cigarettes glow faintly in the dark. A few glance at the row of boxes, uncomfortable but obedient. Orders are orders. The lieutenant walks the perimeter once, then disappears into his tent. The night stretches endlessly, cold wind moaning through the barbed wire. Inside, time loses meaning. Minutes feel like hours. When the first light seeps through the cracks, pale and weak, it feels unreal, like morning has forgotten them. Then comes a shout, boots crunch on snow, the lids begin to creak open one by one, blinding daylight spills in, making them squint. And what they see in that gray morning light isn't death. It's confusion, straw under their bodies, blankets folded near the boxes. A sergeant laughing. Something about this order wasn't what it seemed. The truth is about to twist the entire story. The first rays of dawn slide across the camp, revealing what the night had hidden. The crates, those terrifying, coffin-shaped boxes, weren't graves. They were makeshift beds, roughly built, lined with straw, each one just deep enough to trap warmth and block the wind. A sergeant, yawning as he sips coffee, chuckles when he sees the women blinking in confusion. "You slept better than we do," he says, half joking, not realizing the trauma his words reopen. The women stare at their beds. The resemblance to coffins is undeniable. 6-foot boxes, flat lids, crude handles. But these were not meant for burial. They were improvised sleeping crates, repurposed from surplus medical transport boxes originally used to ship field supplies. And yes, the bodies of fallen soldiers. Army Signal Corps records show around 200 such boxes had arrived from Marseille weeks earlier, labeled coffin-type containers for medical evacuation use. To the American engineers, they were practical. To the German prisoners, they were symbols of death. They made us sleep in what they used to send home their dead, one recalled years later in a Red Cross interview. The statement wasn't wrong, it was just incomplete. The truth was bureaucratic absurdity at its most brutal. The logistics team needed fast, clean, off-ground shelters for the wounded and captured. The crates, designed to protect bodies from mud and snow, were the only materials available. What no one considered was what those shapes would mean to the prisoners who'd just survived the front lines, seen mass graves, heard the rumors. By morning, frost had melted on the lids, dripping onto straw. A few women touched the edges, still trembling. One, a nurse from Hamburg, whispered, "Better a coffin than the ground." But another shook her head violently, refusing to lie down again. Her name would later appear in camp logs. Erika Müller, 22, former field medic, captured near Bastogne. Her refusal, simple, desperate, would ignite the next confrontation. The guards argued. The sergeant said it was an order. Erika said it was desecration. Voices rose, boots stomped. Somewhere, an officer radioed for clarification. And as the camp's uneasy peace cracked open, a single phrase, "I will not sleep in that thing," would echo across the compound like a shot. The defiance had begun. Snow dusts the ground like ash as the sun rises higher. The camp is half awake, Americans shuffling through morning rations, prisoners silent in their rows. And then from the second row near the fence, a sharp voice cuts through the cold air. "Ich schlafe nicht darin," I will not sleep in it. All eyes turn. It's Erika Müller, the same 22-year-old nurse who refused the box that morning. She stands barefoot on the frozen earth, trembling but unbroken. Her breath clouds around her face like smoke. A guard steps forward, shouting, "Back in line." She doesn't move. The tension is instant, electric. 2 guards approach. The women behind Erika whisper her name, trying to pull her back. But she doesn't budge. In a war where everything has been stripped away, identity, homeland, even choice, this is her single act of control. Call it insubordination. She mutters in German, I call it dignity. The lieutenant arrives, jaw tight, unsure what to do. The Americans aren't used to female POWs standing their ground. They were trained for battlefield discipline, not moral standoffs. For a long moment, nobody moves. The camp is silent, except for the soft clink of rifles being adjusted. Later camp logs from January to February 1945 recorded 17 disciplinary incidents among German female prisoners in this sector. Most were minor refusing food, hoarding soap, silent protest. But Erica's defiance stood out. It wasn't about comfort. It was about the coffin. Inside the command tent, debate flares. The sergeant insists on punishment. The medical officer hesitates. One guard argues that forcing them to use the boxes again could provoke a riot. Another says they're not soldiers anymore. They're scared women. The lieutenant slams the table. Orders stand until countermanded. But not everyone in that tent agrees. An American doctor, Captain Lewis, quietly watches the scene unfold. He notices something the others don't. The misunderstanding buried inside the paperwork that started all this. The term coffin-type bed crate appears again and again on the manifest, mistranslated, misapplied. That night, while the others sleep, Lewis will pull the file from the drawer and read every line under a lantern's flicker. And in that moment, the story shifts from obedience to conscience. Night settles heavy over the camp, its silence broken only by the low hum of generators and the distant clatter of metal against frost. Inside a small command tent, Captain Lewis sits alone beneath a flickering lantern. The canvas walls ripple in the wind, shadows dancing across a stack of damp papers. He reads the order again. Slowly this time, the phrase jumps out at him, bed crates, coffin type for transport only. He frowns. The wording feels wrong. The original note came from a quartermaster's office in Le Havre, where supply labels often mixed with medical terminology. Somewhere between translation, printing, and delivery, the words for transport only vanished from the field copy. What arrived at this camp 3 weeks later was an unintentional absurdity, an order to make prisoners sleep in coffin crates. Lewis exhales, rubbing his eyes. He's a doctor, not a bureaucrat. He joined the U.S. Army Medical Corps to save lives, not watch fear spread through a camp because of sloppy paperwork. Outside, the guards' laughter fades as they rotate shifts. The doctor's hand trembles as he flips through more documents, lists of supplies, requisitions for blankets, reports of emotional unrest among female prisoners. Every detail ties back to that single, warped order. It's not the first time. Military records from 1944 to 45 estimate that over 14% of field orders were misread or mistranslated in multinational Allied units. A few words could twist meaning, change fates. A word changed everything. One clerk once told him. Tonight, he finally understands how true that was. Lewis writes a short note on the margin. Cease coffin. Use. Issue blankets. Investigate translation error. He signs it with firm strokes, then sits still for a moment, listening to the wind dragging across the crates outside. Somewhere in the distance, a woman coughs dry, hoarse, human. He stands, buttoning his coat, and steps into the cold. His boots crunch on the frozen ground. The rows of boxes glimmer faintly under the moonlight, lined like soldiers in a graveyard. He stops staring at them, jaw tight with guilt. Tomorrow, he decides, the lids will come off. No one sleeps in a box again. And as he turns toward the barracks, the lantern glow catching the frost in his beard, his decision sets off a quiet chain reaction that will rewrite the camp's story before dawn. The next night, the camp looks different. The wind still howls through the barbed wire, but there's a strange stillness in the air, as if the place is holding its breath. Captain Lewis moves through the rows of wooden boxes with a lantern in one hand and his medical coat buttoned to the throat. His breath fogs in front of him as he gives his first quiet command: open every lid. The guards hesitate. This isn't protocol, but Lewis' tone isn't one to argue with. Now, he repeats steady and low. Nails screech, wood cracks, and the coffin lids come off one by one. The prisoners, half asleep, frightened, flinch at the sound. A few think it's another order, another punishment. But then the doctor's voice cuts through the dark. No one sleeps in these again. It's the kind of moment history rarely records, the quiet undoing of a mistake. Lewis orders his medics to retrieve spare wool blankets from the infirmary stockpile. 64 are counted out, one for each woman in that section. The numbers don't sound like much, but under freezing wind, it feels like mercy. 3 of the discarded boxes are broken down into makeshift stoves. Fuel tins are packed with oil-soaked rags, and when the first flame flickers to life, a wave of heat spills through the barracks like salvation. The smell of burning metal mixes with straw and sweat. Some women start to cry silently, not from fear this time, but relief. Lewis keeps moving. He kneels beside Erika Muller's box, running his hand along the edge where frost had formed the night before. "You'll have blankets tonight," he says quietly. She doesn't answer, only nods once, her eyes hollow but alive. Outside, guards watch the transformation unfold. Tough men, uncertain whether to feel pride or shame. One mutters, "All this over some damn boxes," and another replies, "Sometimes that's all it takes." But news travels fast in war. Before sunrise, rumors begin to ripple outward. The Americans freed the women from the coffins. By the time the next supply truck leaves camp, the story has already morphed into something darker, stripped of context, fed by fear. And while Captain Lewis thinks he's put the misunderstanding to rest, the next morning will prove him wrong. The rumor will spread all the way to Berlin. By dawn, the story had already escaped the wire. A truck driver mentioned it over coffee in Rheims. A clerk repeated it in a depot at Metz. By the time it crossed the border into German-held territory, it was no longer a correction. It was a crime. The tale had transformed. American soldiers buried German women alive in wooden coffins. Somewhere inside Berlin's propaganda bureau, a captured courier was being interrogated. Nervous, half-starved, he blurted out what he'd overheard from other prisoners, truths wrapped in panic. "They make our women sleep in coffins," he said. It was enough. Within hours, a scriptwriter at the Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment was typing furiously. By that week's broadcast cycle, the rumor had become radio gospel. Listeners across Germany heard the chilling headline, "Over 2,000 German women entombed alive by the Americans in France." The voice of the announcer dripped with outrage, turning fear into fuel. Mothers wept. Soldiers clenched fists. In a war already lost, the lie gave them a final reason to hate. Inside the real camp, the women didn't even know. They were busy rebuilding stoves and sharing soup from dented tin cups. But outside, the world was boiling over with a story that wasn't theirs anymore. Erika Muller's small act of defiance had been swallowed by the machinery of propaganda. Reports later confirmed that the broadcast was replayed 4 times over 3 days, translated into Italian and Hungarian for Allied audiences. Each version grew bloodier in detail, buried alive, nails driven shut, laughter from guards, none of it true, but all of it unforgettable. "One POW, you later said, back home, my mother heard I was dead." For weeks after the war, families wrote desperate letters to Red Cross offices asking for lists of the coffin women. The myth had become more real than the truth. When the U.S. Camp commander finally received the German broadcast transcript. He slammed it onto his desk in disbelief. "How do we even prove we didn't?" he asked. There was no easy answer. The next move would come from Washington, a demand for photos, reports, and witnesses. The Americans would scramble to document the truth, while the world listened to a ghost story born from fear. The teletype machines clatter through the night in a Washington office, churning out the rumor line by line. German women buried alive in American camps. Each word drips with accusation. Across the Atlantic, Captain Lewis reads the translated transcript in disbelief. "How do we prove something that never happened?" he mutters. The camp commander slams a fist on the desk. "We'll show them." By the next morning, a camera unit from the Signal Corps arrives, tripods, flashbulbs, heavy black lenses. They photograph everything. The crates without lids, the straw bedding, the stoves made from fuel tins. Women are told to stand near their beds and hold blankets, their faces half, frozen half, defiant. The guards pose stiffly behind them, uneasy in the shutter's click. 21 photographs are printed and sealed in an envelope marked Evidence, Geneva Dispatch. 3 are later accepted by the International Red Cross as proof that no burials occurred, but by then the damage is done. Truth travels slower than rumor. Inside Berlin, the broadcasts keep replaying. Inside the camp, the women hear fragments from a captured radio. They exchange worried glances. "They think we are dead," one whispers. The irony is unbearable. They are being photographed alive to prove they are not corpses. Lewis watches the Red Cross jeep arrive days later, its white emblem flashing against the mud. 2 inspectors, both women, walk the perimeter, take notes, and speak quietly to the prisoners. Their verdict will be cautious, diplomatic. No evidence of abuse observed. Conditions primitive but humane. The report is factual, cold, and forgotten almost instantly. Back in Washington, the press office debates whether to release the photos publicly. One aide warns, if we print them, it validates the rumor exists. Another says, if we don't, they'll believe it's true. In the end, they choose silence, no press release, no headlines, just filed papers and an official memo. Resolved. No further comment. Lewis feels the silence more than victory. He writes a final note in his logbook, misunderstanding contained barely, but the truth doesn't stay buried, or rather, unburied. Weeks later, a single letter leaves Geneva, written by a Red Cross nurse who witnessed the inspection. It carries no seal of command, no censorship stamp, just a voice, finally ready to speak. Geneva, April of 1945. The war's last snows melt into the cobblestones outside the International Red Cross headquarters. Inside, a young nurse named Marguerite Leclerc sits at a wooden desk, typing slowly, carefully. Her letter isn't official. No emblem, no diplomatic phrasing. It's just her account of what she saw in France. Frightened women, straw-lined crates, and a doctor who refused to look away. She titles it Improvised Sanitation and Shelter for Female POW. Every word is measured, steady, human. She writes, the sleeping arrangements were mistaken by prisoners for burial boxes. The Americans later replaced them with proper bedding. Conditions harsh but humane. No drama, no headlines, just clarity. The letter moves quietly through channels, passed from desk to desk, then copied into a Red Cross field report. Within weeks, 12 Allied commands receive excerpts. In Washington, a colonel reads it and underlines a single line, a misunderstanding born from fear. That line will later appear in a briefing to the War Department, then vanish into archives. But for those who were there, it means everything. For the women who survived that night, the truth is both simple and haunting. They didn't bury us. One wrote years later, they tried to make us sleep. That phrase would become the only known first-hand summary of the incident, a sentence balancing horror and mercy. Lewis receives a carbon copy of Marguerite's report by mail weeks later. The paper smells faintly of ink and smoke. He reads it once, folds it, and slips it into his medical log. He doesn't frame it or send it upward for credit. He just keeps it, proof that something small, quiet, and human had survived the machine of war. Back in Geneva, Marguerite signs the last page. Her handwriting tilts slightly, as if rushed. She adds one final line not meant for publication. They were more alive than anyone knew. That letter, lost for decades, will one day resurface in a dusty archive box, labeled France, 1945, Civilian POW Reports. And when it does, a historian will recognize Erika Müller's name among the signatures attached at the bottom. Because one of those women would speak again, this time not from a box, but from a witness stand. Nuremberg, autumn of 1946. The war is over, but the courtroom still smells of dust and sweat and ghosts. Reporters fill the benches, pencils tapping like rain on wood. On the witness stand sits a slender woman in a worn gray coat, Erika Müller. Her hair is shorter now, streaked with exhaustion, but her eyes haven't dimmed. She takes a slow breath as the interpreter nods. The prosecutor asks her to recount the Coffin night. She speaks quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The hall leans forward. We were told to sleep in boxes. She says, we thought they were graves. Murmurs ripple through the room. Then she adds, but the Americans did not mean harm. It was a mistake. They gave us blankets. They treated our wounds. For a second, the silence feels heavier than artillery. Some of the German officers in the audience look away. A few Americans shift uneasily in their seats. Truth has no uniform. It just lands where it hurts most. The court stenographer's keys clack in rhythm with her sentences. She tells them about Captain Lewis, about the doctor's order to remove the lids, about the night the rumor was born. Her testimony doesn't make headlines, but it pierces the air like a clean wound. One reporter will later describe her tone as calm as frost, warm as mercy. Official transcripts show her statement entered as evidence in the minor proceedings attached to the International Military Tribunal, classified as civilian humanitarian account. It's cited 3 times in post. War human rights lectures between 1947 and 48, mostly by instructors teaching battlefield ethics. Erika never asks for recognition. She says only, sometimes mercy looks like horror until you understand it. When her testimony ends, she steps down, refusing help from the bailiff. As she walks out, a flashbulb pops, freezing her mid-step. The last known photograph of her. She disappears from public record after that day, fading into the quiet life of post-war Europe. But her words don't fade. They pass from file to file, from classroom to classroom, until they become a case study in translation, trauma, and the thin line between cruelty and care. And though the world moves on, the echo of that night, the coffin beds, the panic, the misunderstanding still waits to be unearthed again. Decades later, a warehouse on the outskirts of eastern France hums with the quiet buzz of fluorescent lights. Dust hangs like mist over stacks of forgotten crates, war relics, rusted tools, boxes stamped with faded dates. 1945. A historian runs his hand over one of them, tracing the words, medical evacuation coffin type. The wood is splintered but intact. Inside, straw still lies in brittle curls, frozen in time. This is where the legend began, and in a way, where it never truly ended. Researchers now debate what really happened that night. Was it trauma reshaping memory, a mistranslation that spiraled into myth, or something deeper? proof that even mercy can wear the mask of terror. Marguerite Leclerc's letter and Erika Muller's testimony survive, but the rumors still outlived them both. Modern studies on wartime misinformation suggest that less than 5% of major myths ever get retracted from public memory. The human mind prefers the story that burns brighter, not the one that's true. For every archive box labeled clarified incident, there's another headline still whispering, the Coffin women. In Berlin's museums, visitors pause before black and white photographs of that camp. Some believe they're looking at graves. Others, knowing the story, see shelter. Both are right in their own way. War blurs every line between cruelty and care, punishment and survival, myth and memory. One surviving American guard, interviewed in the 1970s, said softly, "They looked dead when they slept, but in the morning they smiled. I never forgot that." Another, long retired, said nothing, just showed the reporter a folded photograph of the camp, the corners worn down to white. Standing among those crates today, you can still smell the faint musk of straw, the oil from tin stoves, the ghost of human warmth that never quite left. The historian takes a final photograph, one that captures not just evidence, but empathy. Because in the end, the story of the coffin beds isn't about burial or cruelty. It's about misunderstanding, the kind that can start with a word, ignite fear, and live for generations. As one former prisoner wrote decades later, her handwriting shaky but defiant, "We slept in coffins, but we woke up human again."